Good morning and welcome to this joint IMF World Bank high-level event, Rising to the Challenges, Policy Action in Low-Income Countries and the Role of International Community. I am Andrea Linarčić, an economist working in Strategy, Policy and Review Department here at the IMF. Welcome to the participants joining here in person, participants joining online, and also to all those of you who are watching the live stream on the IMF or the World Bank web platforms. If you're joining the conversation online, you can use the hashtag #ActionForGrowth to share your thoughts. So today we come here together from across the globe to foster a common understanding on the key challenges facing low-income countries and to discuss priority areas for domestic reforms and the role of international community. Today's agenda features esteemed speakers from different countries and organizations around the world. And we will begin our event today with the fireside chat between the IMF Managing Director, Kristalina Georgieva, and the World Bank Group President, Ajay Banga. The chat will be moderated by Yahoo Finance anchor, Rachel Akufo. Please welcome the IMF Managing Director, the World Bank President, and Ms. Akufo.
Good morning.
Good morning, everyone.
Thank you so much for joining us this morning. So we want to get right into this fireside chat. We have a lot that we'd like to get through. Kristalina, I'd like to first start with you. As we look around, we've had several turbulent years. How would you characterize the global economic situation today and the prospects for low-income countries?
I want to start with the good news, and it is the world economy today is doing better than we feared even a year ago. Growth is holding, inflation is going down, and the expectation that we will move through this phase of high inflation without recession, the so-called soft landing, is up. That also translates with better conditions for low-income countries. What they see is also their growth prospects improving. They see inflation going down, and some of the low-income countries see prospects of tapping into markets. But this, unfortunately, is not the whole story. Both globally, we are not yet done in the fight against inflation, and major central banks are not rushing to cut interest rates. In low-income countries, the hit of this shock after shock, pandemic, the war in Ukraine, high prices, is felt most profoundly. In fact, our analysis shows that scarring from the shocks in advanced economies and emerging market economies is less than we feared, but scarring in low-income countries is higher than we expected. They today are 10% below, in GDP terms, their projected trend from before the pandemic. So imagine they have 10% less, and then what comes on top of it? One, the fact that many of them have high debt levels. The average debt service eats up 13% of GDP. So you're 10% less, and you spend 13% to service debt. And what I'm particularly worried is that with growth being slow, their chances to catch up are actually worsened. And when we look at low-income countries, we have to recognize they're not one universe with no differences. You have low-income countries with more diversified economies, better fundamentals, they handle all this better. And then you have fragile states, you have countries that are truly facing life or death economic, social difficulties. And this is why it is so important. I want to turn to those who are here and those who are online. Thank you for joining us. It is so important that as we step into the period of the spring meetings, we focus on the low-income countries. And Rachel, thank you for moderating this discussion with Ajay and me.
And certainly an important discussion when we think of how different countries have emerged differently coming out of these multiple hits. So, Ajay, given this backdrop, what are the key challenges that developing countries must overcome to eradicate poverty while ensuring our planet remains livable? And in what areas are innovative solutions most needed to address these interconnected issues?
Yeah, Dan, thank you for having me, and I'm glad to be here for the same reasons that Kristalina just said. By the way, one little point to not forget. The fact that their debt servicing cost is at that level also means it crowds out health and education. In fact, a number of them are spending more on repaying debt than they would be able to spend on healthcare and education. And that just tells you how challenging their own circumstances are. And you can say they should have been smarter when they borrowed the money. That should have, could have is a historical view. The question is, we are where we are, and people need help. And I think that's kind of one of the biggest issues coming out of what she just said. Your question to me is a little different. Since the day I joined, I've been talking about these intertwined challenges. And that's the issue of the fact that to believe that you can take on poverty or sharing prosperity, which were excellent goals for the bank, and much progress was made by many institutions over 30, 40 years, including Kristalina at her time in the bank. That got set back. It started with the pandemic. But I think you've got to realize that underlying this is the fact that climate change, fragility, conflict, violence, food insecurity, and pandemics and healthcare are all things that you cannot compartmentalize and hope that you can deal with them separately from poverty. And so getting that, the consequence of that is that the luxury of compartmentalizing was somebody else's. We can't do that. And so that means you have to take these on and comprehend how to deal with them. And I think that one of the things that a lot of the people in the bank are thinking about is that, do we really need to invent new things we need to do, or do we need to just do them differently? So I would argue that in a number of cases, technology and solutions exist to some of the challenges we're discussing. In others, they don't. To give you an example where they don't and where true innovation is required, or where they are beginning to get available, is, for example, livestock methane from livestock. There is a lot of research going into how to develop the right kind of feed stuff for that to reduce. We help to fund some of that research, so do many others. When you fund that, the question is then what do you do with it? Can you take it to scale and replicate it in as many countries as possible? So we look back 3-4 years from today and say we moved the needle as compared to spreading it out. Similarly, I went to Indonesia and I saw these mangrove plantations where not only had we helped to regenerate the mangroves, but we'd also made sure that the money then went to the community, which was able to then therefore not live off cutting mangroves to provide for their lifestyle. It's the same thing in the Amazon today, where, as we know, President Lula has taken out the idea of fighting what was going on there with deforestation. Now, the deforestation was not just plundering. It's because people needed it for their life. But it impacts the rainfall from North America to Patagonia. So we're all in this together. And what he's trying to say is, maybe I can direct that energy into ecotourism, into timber, but done sustainably, into healthcare, into things for the community, so that we can turn from using the forest for one kind of survival to actually creating a different form of growth and development, and not making the false choice of cutting down the forest in return for that. I think there is where the bank can play a role. Take the solutions and technology, invest in new ones, but both those things, scale them and replicate them so we can look back at moving the needle well over the coming years.
That's definitely an important part, they're scaling and replicating. Obviously, none of these things exist within a bubble, as you mentioned there. So, Kristalina, what would it take for the low-income countries to reduce vulnerabilities and achieve sustainable and a meaningful raise in income levels, and importantly, quickly?
It will take the countries themselves doing more to build strength of their economies, and the international community to be a reliable partner. The saying goes, it takes two to tango. And here, I want to flag three very important tasks for the countries, and then two for us, for the international community. For the countries, we know, we see it, that those that are doing better are countries with strong institutions, rule of law, transparency, less corruption. And building those strengths is what nobody but the countries themselves can take on. We know, and this is number one, build institutions and policies so you have strength. Number two, countries can very practically look at where they're falling short in generating the kinds of revenues they need to invest in their people, to invest in infrastructure, to invest in prosperity. And we did an analysis that shows that up to 9% tax to GDP is still for grabs in many countries. So build your tax system, especially focusing on bringing more of the economy in the open. You can't do all of it, but as much as you can. The richer part of the population, the businesses that are thriving, they have an obligation to the rest of society. Number three, one thing that we are very concerned in many countries is that their buffers, both domestic and external, have melted during this crisis. So we look at low-income countries, and quite a number of them have reserves, external reserves, below 3 months of import. And this we take to be the critical level for a country to be able to serve its people. So having policies in place and actions to rebuild reserves and look at things that are on the way of that, countries can and must do. And of course, that comes then to our part, because very hand on heart, it would be morally wrong and bad for the countries and the world if they're left to struggle with these challenges on their own. The international community has a huge responsibility to step up. What can we do? Of course, we are source of financing. For the fund, it is this external capacity. We are balance of payments supporter, so we can provide loans, and we have done it remarkably well. I want to thank our board. I see some of our board members, and I want to thank our staff, because the fund in this period of time stepped up remarkably strongly. We have provided about $32 billion in loans. We also provided $34 billion in SDR allocation to these countries. Of this $32 billion, $24 billion is zero interest rate loans. And if you compare to before the pandemic, our level of lending to this group of countries was below $10 billion. So we more than tripled financing, and that is important, but even more important is engagement in collaboration with other institutions and in support of capacity development, institution building in these countries. Because what often people think of the fund association is what? Programs. But actually, very, very frequently, we do much more by helping countries build the tax systems, improve the quality of spending, get institutions to be more transparent. And that, I think, is where that dual role of financier and institution builder, capacity developer, for us stands up. I want to thank the Ajay and the bank. They have also they have moved heaven and earth in this period of time. But we also recognize so much more needs to be done.
And certainly, as you mentioned, a holistic process there, and something that does require work with policy. So, Ajay, bringing you back in here, what specific policies should low-income countries pursue to increase climate resilience, create jobs, reduce poverty, and foster sustainable growth? And what is the role of the international community?
So, I mean, if you pick jobs for a minute, which I think is the single best way to drive a nail in the coffin of poverty, then what you have to think about is the fact that in the coming decade, more than 1 billion people in the global south, by global south, I'm loosely saying the emerging markets and developing economies, there's going to be 1 billion odd people coming of age for jobs. And that's what the demographic dividend is supposed to represent. And I think it will if they grow up with clean air, clean water, health and education, which is where we started from. But when they do grow up, they need jobs. Currently, the forecast for the same countries is 325 million. That's a big gap. Now, forecasts are not destiny, so we can do something about them. But to do something about them, you need a number of things to fall into place. Policy. So the bank is both a money bank and a knowledge bank. And working with the IMF, who also are both a money institution and a capacity and knowledge institution, we both bring these two things to the table. And the knowledge side of it is where we can help to build policies. She described a few. I could tell you, for example, if you think that gender and the empowering of gender makes a difference to productivity in a country, which kind of with 2 women on the stage, I'm in a good place saying that, but I believe in it anyway, you have to invest in the policies that make that possible. Everything from access to finance, to education, to quality health care for women, to legislative policies, to the availability of childcare, to the availability of safe transit, and so on. That's just one example. So there's a whole series of these you can do in policies, trade policies, facilitation policies, that. On jobs, if I can just speak for a minute, I don't know how much time you have, but if I've got a minute, I'm going to use that for this. If you took Africa, where you're from originally,
yes,
where a large part of our effort goes currently, the lion's share of our money tends to go to Africa, particularly from IDA. I believe the jobs that will come in the coming decade will come from 5 areas. Infrastructure and the construction of infrastructure, roads, ports, airports, bridges. Energy, I'm taking it out of infrastructure only because I think connecting people to power deserves its own attention. 600 million people in Africa do not have any power. Changing that is what we think people like us should do. And that'll create jobs. Third will be the whole space of healthcare. Disseminating healthcare to Africa will require primary healthcare centers, nurses, technicians, PPE manufacturing. There's going to be a whole series of jobs there. Tourism, which you can see is already booming. There are recent articles about the growth of hotels and tourism across Africa.
yes.
And finally, agribusiness, because Africa could be the food basket of the world, if done right, with lots of ifs and buts, but it could be there. Then the question arises, are we all, the international community, helping countries on the ground pursue the right policies and the right financing for these 5? And digitization can help, but if people don't have power, they can't charge their phone with their finger. So we have to get them power. It is a basic human right. And so then, are we digitizing, are we helping them with the right policies and the right financing to make that happen? Those are the kind of questions that she and I are trying to tackle as part members of the international community. It's governments as well, it's other NGOs, it's MDBs, it's the whole lot. But that to us is our task.
It's true, because people forget some of these countries risk getting left behind, but if you're not able to have continued reliable power, you do.
It's a fundamental basis for everything.
Yes.
Just as digital identity is the basis for a digital revolution, electricity is the basis even for digital. So.
Yep.
And so, Kristalina, to follow up here then, how will the IMF ensure adequate support for low-income countries?
Well, the number one issue for all of us is to step back and say, what are we talking about? What are the needs? And this is what our team has done at the IMF. We produce a report on macro, well, here it is, I actually can show it. It is on macroeconomic development and prospects for low-income countries. And what we have grasped with in this report is the size of the challenge. It's enormous. Low-income countries over the next 4 years would need $840 billion to flow in terms of international support. And obviously, it cannot be just financing from our institutions. A big chunk of it has to come from private sector investments, domestically and internationally. So when we look at this challenge, what we are asking ourselves is two questions. One, how do we come strong enough on our side? How do we guarantee we have the resources to do our part? At the IMF, we are now starting a discussion. Actually, on April 10th, we are going to have a board meeting to talk about the future of our instrument for low-income countries. It's called Poverty Reduction and Growth Trust. We have managed, with the help of our members, to raise our capacity to finance, but we still have part of the job not finished, which is to bring subsidies so we can have low-cost financing. We have to recognize that our ability to step up matters for the ability of the fund to do our job. I can tell you, I expect there would be more demand for financing from both institutions in the years to come because of this huge financial gap. But it also matters because when we are there, we bring confidence for others to come. When the bank and the fund are in the country, we send a signal, including to private investors. This country is moving forward the right way. So I think of the fund in the next years as the time in our history when more of our attention and more of our programs will be focused on this group of countries, on low-income countries. If you look at the history of the fund, it is very interesting because we provide balance of payment support to anyone, advanced economies, emerging markets, low-income countries, and we go through these cycles. The last cycle was Eurozone. But I think, in my heart of heart, I am convinced that this next cycle, our task would be low-income countries and vulnerable emerging market economies. And we are really gearing up. For the emerging markets, we got an increase in our quotas, 50% increase. And now the task is to have the PRGT fully equipped, capable to do our part. And I am exhausting our time. So let me pass the baton to Ajay.
So I want to make sure we just quickly get these last two questions in. Ajay, the World Bank is launching the process of the International Development Association's 21st replenishment. Please share with us your vision for IDA and what do you hope to achieve with the replenishment and which areas will future IDA support focus on?
Well, what I want to achieve from the replenishment is the resources that are required to make all that we're discussing come true. There are 75 countries who currently receive IDA resources, and they need the opportunities that we are talking about because they have all the problems Kristalina talked about at the beginning, but they also have, I think, a wealth of natural resources, including plenty of sun and wind, which is important in the green transition, but they also have human resources, that demographic dividend that I was referring to. But policies and effort done the right way will be required for them to surmount their debt, the investment and trade paucity that we are seeing currently, some of the geopolitics and the fragmentation of the system, which goes against their chance for their time in the sun to come true, right? So I think that's kind of the first part. 36 countries have graduated from IDA over the years, Japan, Korea, India. So there are great examples of countries doing well out of this and now becoming outstanding donors as well. So the place, it works. The question is, how do we get the right amount of resources, both in terms of grants and concessional financing, to her point about subsidies, but also then absolute amounts of money to put at work. And then how do we get our capacity and our knowledge to work for that? That's what I'm trying to work on to make a difference in IDA 21. I think working with Kristalina, who is also beginning more and more with the fund to focus on similar countries, enables us to take 1 + 1 and make 3. We're trying to find intelligent ways where we could cooperate, because she has resources that I don't have. I have capabilities she may not have. But the country doesn't care about the two of us being separate. They care about a solution. And finding a way to do that well together is not that easy, but is very important. And that's kind of where I'm headed, in my head, with all our people. Who, this IDA work did not happen in isolation. There's tens of thousands of people who have contributed to it. And they're really keen to see IDA 21 be another great opportunity.
And certainly that collaboration, very important, as you mentioned. It does signal, growth coming and renewed interest in these countries as well. Just very, very quickly, obviously, we're going to be moving on to our next session shortly. Just in a few words, what are you hoping to see in the next session?
Excitement about the future of these countries. I want us to imagine the idle capital in the north moving, because of great conditions, attractive conditions, to the countries where youthful population is eager to work. And this transforming the fate of these countries and bringing prosperity for them and also for the rest of the world. Excitement.
Ajay?
I think if I can get awareness and knowledge about what they're dealing with, but also the opportunity to know that capacity and knowledge building along with money can be used really well to change their future. Their future is our future. Young people are our future. They have young people. It is time for those young people to get a fair shot at their future.
And there you have it.
And I want to recognize everybody in the audience, but in particular, what you see on this table are the Deputy Managing Director of the IMF, Antoinette Sayer, sitting right next to Anne Berge, the Managing Director for the World Bank. And next to them are Jayla and Pablo. These are the leaders of our teams. It is such a beautiful picture to see us all together.
Indeed, a wonderful collaboration. We're looking forward to seeing that reflected even more going forward. A big thank you to the World Bank President and the Managing Director of the IMF. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Ashok. Thank you.
You're so right.
Thank you, Managing Director Gigoreva, President Banga, and Ms. Akufo for setting the stage for this morning discussions and this insightful and informative chat. Next, we move to a presentation of G20 vision and priorities from the Brazil presidency. Please welcome Secretary of International Affairs from Ministry of Finance of Brazil, Tatiana Rosito, who will be joining us from virtually from the screen above.
Good morning to all. Thank you. At the outset, let me salute the IMF and the World Bank for the organization of this event and greet all participants that are on site or online. It's indeed a pleasure and an honor to do this keynote representing Minister Fernando Haddad and the Brazilian G20 presidency. I'm encouraged by the fireside chat with Kristalina and the Jay, and also the host of ministerial speakers in the next two sessions. And I wish us a great event today. Let me start by saying that the very premise of this event, the necessity of a particular focus by the international community on low-income countries and achieving the SDGs is very timely and welcome. As we know, leaks have disproportionately suffered in the aftermath of the pandemic. In many cases, growth remains well below pre-pandemic trends, while debt levels have risen substantially, announcing a looming debt crisis. At the same time, the world is seriously lagging behind on the SDGs, and sustained progress in leaks is crucial if we are going to meet our goals by 2030. Furthermore, leaks typically lack adequate representation in decision-making forums. Their views and perspectives are often not adequately reflected in key policy documents. The relatively optimistic message of the most recent World Economic Outlook, for instance, which identified broadly balanced risks and an open path towards a soft landing, does not apply to several leaks. Instead, they're facing debt crisis or heightened risks of debt distress, combined with the challenge to reignite growth and accelerate progress towards the SDGs. My brief talk today will thus focus on two crucial topics: debt challenges and the way forward for the international community to support leaks in delivering on the SDGs agenda. In both cases, the Brazilian G20 presidency has put some ambitious proposals on the table. I will present them in turn and offer some concluding remarks on the way forward. First, regarding that, let me tell you that this issue is very close to the heart of President Lula and Minister Haddad. The situation of low-income countries is, of course, of particular concern. There are a number of policy measures that leaks could pursue to enhance domestic resource mobilization, and Brazil continues to be fully supportive of the work of the IMF and the World Bank in these areas. Nevertheless, no matter the size of the domestic fiscal effort, structural debt issues will only be properly addressed through international policy cooperation and coordinated action among official creditors, private creditors, debtors, and multilateral institutions, much in the spirit highlighted by AJ. IMF and World Bank figures leave no doubt about the magnitude and the urgency of the situation. Presently, 54% of leaks are either at high risk or already in debt distress. That service is projected to increase significantly when compared to the past decade, which will create difficult trade-offs, jeopardizing investments in crucial areas like climate resilience, poverty reduction, health, and education. This, in turn, can have serious social and political consequences, in some cases undermining hard-won political stability and still young democratic institutions. Reflecting the central importance we give to the topic, the Brazilian presidency convened two high-level discussions in São Paulo and in Brasilia in the context of the G20 meetings of both vice ministers and ministers. Overall, our effort is to galvanize political momentum, unblock difficult issues, foster political consensus, and move to action. At a more technical level, in the International Financial Architecture Working Group, we are committed to supporting, improving, and continuing the implementation of existing initiatives, as well as exploring new solutions. In particular, our focus goes beyond promoting well-functioning debt restructurings. We believe that in many cases, it is still possible to prevent imminent debt distress from materializing. Therefore, we are keen to support initiatives for coordinating efforts among stakeholders. In particular, the design of mechanisms that could prevent countries from sliding into debt distress due to temporary liquidity challenges. We will also prioritize policy-related issues linked to the implementation of the common framework. Regular updates will be provided throughout the year, and new transparency initiatives are being discussed, enabling interested parties to access crucial information and learn from past cases and lessons. Together with the IFA co-chairs, France and Korea, we are working towards a G20 note on lessons learned from the first common framework cases. By drawing from these experiences and further refining the common framework, we aim to facilitate transparent, orderly, and timely implementation of debt restructuring, while promoting efficient information sharing among relevant parties. We are also happy to co-lead the Global Sovereign Debt Roundtable with the IMF and the World Bank. which has provided valuable insights for enhancing the debt restructuring process. This year, the workshops have covered topics like sovereign ratings and debt distress, climate resilient debt clauses and swaps, revisit the comparability of treatment and debt perimeter, the impact of non-resident holders, and SOE debt in restructuring. Actually, before this event, we just finished our first deputies meeting for the year on GSDR, preparing for the principals meeting. Going further, we have planned candid discussions on climate resilient debt clauses and the possible use of innovative mechanisms such as debt for climate, debt for nature, and debt for health swaps. Although we know full well that these are not panaceas, we believe well-designed swaps can have very promising side effects by creating the right incentives and means to implement high-quality public policies. We have also been working towards new initiatives, such as an Africa-led debate on debt, which will amplify the voices of debtor countries and their perspectives on the matter, helping to remedy the issue of insufficient representation that I mentioned earlier. Heightened debt vulnerabilities are not the whole story, however. So before I finish, let me turn briefly to the second key issue I mentioned at the beginning of this talk, namely the necessity of stepping up international efforts towards achieving the SDGs. Indeed, Brazil's #1 priority in the G20 is to fight hunger, poverty, and inequality, which have also an inextricable relationship to climate and other challenges. Both in the finance track and the Sherpas track of the G20, we are fully committed to focusing the attention on bringing the SDGs back on track. This involves several initiatives in almost all G20 working groups, from a new debate on macroeconomic and inequality to progressive international taxation initiatives to inclusive infrastructure debates. In the interest of time, I will expand here only on the task force for the establishment of a global alliance against hunger and poverty, as proposed by President Lula. As the name suggests, this task force will aim to boost global progress towards SDG 1 by creating a global alliance, which will make possible the adoption of effective poverty alleviation policies in countries most in need. The alliance will provide both political commitment, technical support, and a basket of tested policies that can be readily implemented by the leagues adhering to it. In the finance track, we'll seek ways to efficiently mobilize existing poverty alleviation funding and new resources to finance this initiative. The commitment of multilateral development banks and other international financial institutions will be of the essence. Therefore, I invite you to seek more information about the Alliance and study ways your organizations can contribute to it. Together with the World Bank, we will host a high-level event during the spring meetings on the 17th of April to present the Alliance to the broader international financial community. Several other events will follow during the year. For those of you interested in hearing more, we are happy to facilitate contact with the task force teams of the Brazilian G20 presidency. To conclude, let me once again commend the IMF and the World Bank for organizing this very important event. We should act now to prevent the debt difficulties in some countries from becoming a full-blown debt crisis, which would make the SDGs definitely unachievable. But addressing that issues is just one side of the coin. The international community must join efforts to offer a positive development perspective for leaks, including the eradication of hunger and extreme poverty. Count on the Brazilian G20 presidency to foster international consensus to address these pressing challenges. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rosito. It's very good to have the voice of G20 in this important engagement. So now it's time to introduce our first panel. So the first panel will be focusing on domestic reform priorities to accelerate progress towards Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. This panel will be moderated by Shanta Devarajan, who is a professor of international development at Georgetown University. Professor will be joined by a virtual panel, which he will introduce shortly. In this session, you will also have a chance to ask questions. So he will take questions from the registered participants online, You can just type them in the WebEx chat, or for those of you who are here in person, you can scan the QR code that you can find on your tables, and you can put your questions in the app that will open up when you scan the code. We will pass as many as possible of these questions to our moderator. Shanta Devarajan, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Nice to see old friends after a while. And I am delighted to be moderating this session, which follows from the opening remarks by Kristalina and Ajay, about probably the most significant aspect of improving prospects for developing countries and low-income countries, which is the policy framework. How do we improve policies that can then induce better results and also make the aid and the resources that we're going to talk about in the second half more productive? So this is the pivotal part of the session. And for that, I'm very pleased to introduce our panel. And they're on? Okay. The first is Romualdo Wadagni, who is the finance minister of Benin. And then Vera Daves de Sousa, who's the finance minister of Angola. Liao Min, who's the vice minister of finance of China. And Andrew Mitchell, who's the minister of state for development and Africa of the United Kingdom. Welcome to all of you. Delighted to have you here. To get us started, we're going to now have a presentation from colleagues at the World Bank and the IMF, a very short, they assure me, a 5-minute presentation to make sure we're all on the same page in terms of the facts. So, Guillaume.
Thank you very much, Shanta, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. So I'm Guillaume Chabert from the IMF, and together with my colleague Manuela Francisco from the World Bank, we will indeed briefly present 4 slides. On this first slide, we wanted to underline that the macroeconomic outlook in low-income countries is finally improving, but scarring from the pandemic are stronger than for higher-income countries, and economic outcomes are heterogeneous across countries. In addition, while improving, as you can see on the slides, the projected recovery in growth remain limited and would still be insufficient to reverse the adverse impacts of the successive shocks since 2020 and to make significant progress towards income convergence with more advanced economies. Debt has stabilized, but remains elevated, and as the managing director of the IMF and the World Bank president underlined, many low-income countries are facing an increasing liquidity squeeze with high cost of debt service and a limited space available to finance education, health, infrastructure, development spending in general. International financial institutions have stepped up their support, but the overall volume of net financial flows to low-income countries has fallen. So this combination of low growth and high debt service makes it extremely challenging to restart progress in poverty reduction, that's the chart on the right, and achieve the sustainable development goals. More growth and more resources are needed to battle poverty, provide job opportunities, and build resiliency in a more shock-prone world. Now, against this backdrop, domestic resource mobilization is critical as part of the package that would increase policy space in low-income countries. It would help low-income countries be in a stronger position to implement growth-enhancing policies, strengthen social assistance, and have financing to cover development spending. As you see on the chart on the left, revenue mobilization remains low in low-income countries, well below levels seen in emerging markets and even more advanced economies. Similarly, mobilization of private savings through financial sector intermediation is limited in low-income countries. So there is a potential on both fronts that could be tapped. And the bank and the fund are joining forces to launch a new DRM initiative to help countries mobilize this potential. The new initiative will take a holistic, result-based approach spanning revenue mobilization, improved spending efficiency, public financial management and debt management, and mobilization of private saving through the development of domestic capital markets. Activities will be carefully sequenced and tailored to the specific needs of each country and open, of course, to the support of other development partners.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. My name is Manuela Francisco. I'm from the World Bank, and I'm jointly presenting with Guillaume. In addition to domestic resource mobilization that Guillaume just talked about, acceleration of economic growth and job creation are also critical. And for this to happen, a number of conditions need to be met. First, we need to unleash economic growth. Private sector needs to invest more, needs to innovate, and needs to grow. And for this, we need a number of conditions. We need an enabling environment, including, but this not just these ones, we need to create digital, transportation, water, and electricity infrastructure. Second, we need contestable and competitive markets. When markets are competitive, productive firms grow and can create more and better jobs. Third, we need investment and productivity growth. For that, firms need capital and need technology. And in terms of policies, for example, policies to attract foreign direct investment can help in both fronts. But economic reforms need to be complemented by policies that connect jobs and people. Productive jobs require skilled workers. In today's world, workers need digital competencies if they want to fully reap the benefits of technology, including artificial intelligence. Finally, but also very important, it's important that we have policies that encourage more women to participate in the labor market. With that, we will expand the talent pool and we will raise productivity and production. Let me talk briefly about social safety nets. We all know that more and better jobs are critical to escape poverty, but we also know that it does not always work for all. And this for two reasons, at least. First, we are seeing around the world that shocks are getting larger and more frequent. A war in a neighboring country, a natural disaster, and the population is back into poverty. Second, economic growth lifts many out of poverty, but not all. We have two charts and two messages. First, we need to allocate more. In low-income countries, the allocation is about 1% of GDP, which is about half of the emerging market economies. Second, and very important, we need to allocate better. On average, only 1/3 of the social spending goes to the poorest 20%. And with this, thank you very much. Let me pass back to Shanta.
Okay, thank you very much, Guillaume and Manuela. So now let me turn to our panelists and start with Minister Wadagni. Minister Wadagni, Benin is often credited with a very robust macroeconomic framework, exemplified by the fact that you had a successful issuance of a $750 million Eurobond just in February. So can you share with us how you did this? What were the successes on the policy front? And also, what were some of the challenges you had in achieving this successful macroeconomic management?
Hello, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes. Thank you.
Okay. No, thank you. First of all, I would like to warmly thank Kristalina and Ajay for the invitation extended to Benin. I would also like to thank them for the very inspiring remarks and also for the very concise and clear presentation we got from both Manuela and Guillaume. Listening to both Ajay and Kristalina actually give us comfort that Benin's reform and priorities are in line with the roadmap for low-income countries to bring the people from poverty to prosperity. And also listen to them, especially to their conclusion, give us hope that there is a path for the youth of Africa to have a bright future. Now, coming to your question, I would like to start saying that the fact that Benin has made clear since 2026 to prioritize having a robust macroeconomic framework in line with the fact that we set a foundation and the engagement with IMF and World Bank based on working through having a robust framework help us to have the capacity to address all the challenges coming from the shocks. As a matter of fact, as a result of 4 years of strong reforms, Benin was in a strong macroeconomic position by the end of 2019, beginning of 2020. For example, the growth rate in Benin was 7%, debt to GDP was below 50%, and the fiscal deficit was around 0.5%. So very strong fiscal policies and strong macroeconomic position that allow us to have the capacity to face the multiple external shocks generated by the 2020 COVID-19 crisis and all the subsequent global crises. The other thing I want to add is Benin is facing the same global crisis, but in addition to that, Benin is facing 2 additional challenges specific to our region. The first being the political instability from our neighboring countries like Burkina Faso and Niger. The second specific crisis we're facing is the consequences of the spillover of the effect of security issue coming from the Sahel. So not only we have to face the global challenges, the global crisis, but we also have to address those additional regional challenges, creating additional pressure on our countries and our capacity to address the needs of our population. So therefore, we can list many challenges, but I want to address 2 of them, explain them, and say how we managed to address those 2 challenges I will just present. The first one being inflation. You know, Benin, and same thing for many countries in the region, we highly depend on importation. We pretty much import everything from food, clothes, to equipment. So the global inflation has exposed our population and small businesses to extreme poverty and economic slowdown. So what we did is to prioritize public spending and dedicate significant part of our budget, close to 20% of the budget, to provide support to the poorest part of our population and to provide additional support and to small businesses and to make sure that our population have the capacity to have access to food and basic needs. One example I want to address here is, half of the youth of the country are in the agricultural sectors. They depend on having access to fertilizer in order to produce cereal and other things they need for day-to-day food. But when you look back to what happened to the fertilizer market, a small fertilizer bag, that price was $25. The price increased to $60. So what we did is, by prioritizing our public spending, we actually step in, and the government has to use public money and also some support coming from World Bank to actually buy the fertilizer and make sure that we provide fertilizer to all our farmers on time. The result of that policy is we managed for the last 2 years to make sure that all the basic products like cereals and cooking oil, all that we produce locally, we managed to maintain the price. And as a whole, we are having the lowest inflation rate in the whole region, and one of the lowest inflation rate in Africa, below 3%, because we had to prioritize public spending and focus part of our money to make sure that we make sure that some of the imports that are the basic need for our population Sometimes we buy them and we provide them to people with some subsidy, or we provide conditions so that small businesses can continue operating. So that's one of the consequences. The second challenge is the fact that we have seen, rising interest rate and liquidity shortage. So what we did is we're using innovative approach to make sure that we find means to finance the additional needs we have for our budget. One of the things we did is we work on a strong SDG framework, taking all the SDGs and putting together the strategy for the country to reach each of them by 2030, and putting in front of each of the SDGs the money we need, the domestic effort we're making for each of them, and the additional support we're getting from World Bank and all our partners, and what we need from the international market. So thanks to that framework, we were able in 2021 to issue the first SDG bond in Africa for $500 million. That is the first SDG issued by African country in the whole continent. That allows us to find means to have access to affordable financing. The second one is we were able to by using a partial guarantee mechanism from African Development Bank to issue just last year 350 credit enhanced loan. So the takeaway here is, because we have a strong macroeconomic situation, we were able to prioritize our public spending to address, the challenges coming from global inflation, and also because we have clear framework and the credibility with the market, we're able to use innovative approach to have access to funding.
Thank you very much, Minister Wadagni. Those are inspiring words, actually, and maybe lessons that we can take to other countries. Let me now turn to Ms. Davis de Sousa, the Finance Minister of Angola. Like Angola, many low-income countries are commodity exporters, mineral exporters in the case of Angola, and they face a particular set of challenges, which is managing the fluctuations in commodity prices, the phenomenon of overspending in good times and then having to tighten their belts in bad times, and also to diversify their economies away from mineral dependence. How is Angola managing these challenges? What seems to have worked well, and what seems to have worked less well?
Thank you, Shanta, for this moderation. I hope that you can hear me.
Yes, we hear you very well.
Thank you. I regret that I'm not there physically. Let me first of all show my gratitude for the invitation. To Kristalina and Ajay, thank you also for the initial conversation, the insights that for sure are aligned to the vision that Angola is following. Well, you are right. We still being heavily dependent on oil. On the fiscal revenue side, next to 60% of our fiscal revenue is still coming from the oil production and oil exports. Almost 90% of our hard currency is coming from the oil exports. So yes, we need to continue working on the diversification of the economy strategy. Till now, we managed to navigate through this process with volatility, with COVID, with logistic constraints coming from geopolitical tensions. So even the drop on the oil price, that's a lot happening. From the last years to now, and having the right partnerships. We were under a program with IMF, EFF program. We had a series of DPOs with the World Bank. We have a very close relation, and we are getting a lot of support from our key creditor, China, whom we also close deals that allow us during COVID to have some breathing space, and more recently to better manage our liquidity. So have these bridges and these partnerships help us to strengthen our non-oil revenues. Under the FF program, we implemented the VAT. Without that, probably it would be more difficult. As already mentioned, we managed to have some breathing space on our debt side and more liquidity now. And we are doing also a proactive debt and liquidity management, just to make sure that we keep the debt sustainable, and we progressively reduce the debt GDP ratio. We came from 140% of ratio debt GDP. Now we are below 80%, but our goal is to reach the 60%, where we already managed to be before the more recent volatility on the exchange rate. So being more resilient in terms of the structure of our GDP, for sure will contribute for all the efforts that we are putting in place, even on front of structural reforms such as the subsidies. We are removing subsidies gradually. We started on electricity, water, more recently on fuel. And we are also reforming the legal framework where the state-owned enterprises works, just to make sure that they are more efficient, more transparent, and they become a real asset to the state and not a source of liability. So we are doing a lot in so many fronts, but at the same time, we still have a huge gap on infrastructures. When you talk about overspending, it's a tricky statement because the gap is huge. So we have at the same time to tap this, but with quality, because we are aware that it's possible to spend better, to pick the right priorities, to unlock the development, putting the infrastructures in the places that with the private sector we can do more, and we can see more coming to increase the food security. As Benin, we also import a lot from food to clothes. So we need to put the road in the right place, the electricity in the right place, and put the business environment right. We still have work to do in terms of bureaucracy. We need to continue fighting against corruption, to combine all those efforts with FDI and export different goods goods and services different from oil. We are working with a focus on agribusiness, with a focus on tourism, mining, and light industry. But the agribusiness is on top of the list because what I already mentioned about food security. We have good experience on subsistence agriculture, but we want to step up on that and have more commercial one to scale up the production and even start exporting for the neighboring countries where we already find markets. The market is there, so we need to tap it. So we need to build not only infrastructures, as I mentioned, but also on people, on capacity, on policies to be able to address that fragility in terms of how our GDP is structured and how we can be more resilient in terms of our fiscal revenues and our balance of payments. So
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Minister. That's actually a rich menu of a rich agenda that you have ahead of you. Let me now turn to Minister Andrew Mitchell from the UK, because I understand he may have to leave soon as well, so I should quickly get to him. Minister Mitchell, the UK plays an important role in supporting low-income countries. But what can the UK and other bilateral partners do to support some of these domestic reforms that we've already heard from the Minister of Benin and the Minister from Angola?
Thank you very much indeed. I don't know whether you can hear me. I hope you can.
Yes, we can.
You can, excellent. Well, look, thanks very much indeed. And I do apologize for the fact that I will have to leave after my contribution and will miss the second question, which I know you wanted to ask, but forgive me for that. And let me say thanks so much to Kristalina and AJ for what they had to say. And it's very good to at least see on remotely some good friends and colleagues. In November of last year, the British government published a white paper on international development in which we set out our vision for ending poverty and tackling climate change in an increasingly contested world. The white paper recognized that a quantum leap is needed in the volume of international finance and private sector capital that flows to low and middle income countries. We need multilateral development banks and development finance institutions to mobilize private investment at far, far greater scale. And British International Investment, our British DFI, will be a leader among its peers in this respect. Now, the white paper also emphasizes that our partner countries have a crucial role to play themselves in implementing the domestic reforms needed to use this financing as efficiently and effectively as possible. We need to see international finance supporting a homegrown, domestically led economic transformation agenda. And at the heart of our white paper, which has been welcomed around the world and strongly endorsed by 20 heads of government and heads of agencies, at the heart of it all is partnership and localism, so that it really is a true moving of the dial in, I submit, the right direction. Now, let me give you 3 examples of what the UK is doing to support these reforms. First, we are supporting greater revenue collection. We have a long history of supporting developing countries to raise domestic tax revenues. And for example, in Rwanda, which I am visiting the day after tomorrow, Britain has been providing support to the Revenue Authority since as long ago as 1997. And during this period, Rwanda's tax to GDP ratio has increased by double, from 8% to 16%. And in the white paper, Britain has also committed to support LICs to get the revenue that they are owed from the international tax system. We have called for reforms to corporate information exchange, particularly to the rules around country-by-country reporting, to which only a handful of developing countries currently have access. And we've also called for more capacity building to enable rules like the new global minimum tax to be implemented. And second, we are supporting our partners to make better use of revenues. Britain has made clear commitments through the white paper to support our partners to develop more effective, efficient, and transparent public financial systems. For example, we are bringing all of the UK's expertise to bear in improving transparency. Britain's National Audit Office, NAO, with funding from the Foreign Office, is working with the supreme audit institutions of Rwanda, Kenya, and the Gambia to strengthen the transparency and scrutiny of public finance. All of this is more possible within open and accountable states and societies. Ultimately, people should have a say in the policy direction of their countries, and in the white paper we have committed to refocusing UK attention on promoting peace, justice, and strong institutions. And third, the white paper commits us to boost international cooperation to tackle illicit finance. Britain is working with the African Development Bank to convene an African Beneficial Transparency Network, bringing together international institutions and African governments looking at matching needs with funding and building a more efficient system for peer support. Measures to tackle illicit flows and tax evasion are needed more than ever before as global demand grows for critical minerals and commodities. And partners like Britain must support governments and citizens to benefit from these mineral resources. We are deploying British expertise to help countries understand their mineral resources, build their capacity, and plan and regulate their extraction in an environmentally and socially responsible way. The very essence of what EITI, the Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative, does. Finally, to support these reforms, we need to make sure that the international finance is there to support countries when they deliver these important reforms. And that is why Britain is championing scaled up MDBs through changes to their capital adequacy frameworks and new capital from shareholders where there is a strong case for it. The white paper also highlights Britain's support for strong replenishments of the arms of the multilateral development banks that provide finance to low-income countries, including the World Bank's IDA. IDA has grown substantially in recent years from $19 billion in 2015 to $37 billion in 2022. The IMF also needs the financial capacity to play a proportionate role. Britain calls on the IMF to strengthen its support for the poorest countries. We strongly supported the temporary increase in the Poverty Reduction and Growth Trust's access limits that was agreed last year, but we need permanently to maintain these higher access volumes to allow the IMF to continue to play its part. The IMF must explore all possible ways to deliver this, including considering how internal resources, including a limited gold sale, can be used to deliver that. Now, thank you very much indeed for listening. It's a great pleasure to be with you, and I'm only sorry that I have to depart shortly. Please forgive me, but every good wish to you all.
Well, thank you very much, Andrew. That was excellent overview of British policy. I have lots of questions for you, but I can't bring them up at this point. But maybe at the next time we meet, we can discuss it further. So now let me turn to Minister Liao, Vice Minister Liao from China. Minister, you know, China was once considered a low-income country, but has transformed itself remarkably over the course of only a few decades into an upper middle-income country. Based on your experience, what's the advice you would give today's low-income countries on how they can transform to upper middle-income status in a reasonable period of time?
Okay, so thank you, Santa. So thank World Bank and IMF for inviting me to join today's very meaningful discussion. I pretty much agree with what just Christiana, RJ, Tatiana, and the World Bank colleagues and also the panelists just saying. I think the domestic reform priorities and the sustainable development goals is highly relevant. So I would like to take this opportunity to share my observation based on the China's over 40-year journey of reform and opening up. I think generally speaking, there is no secret for China's story. China's evolution, as Santa just said, from low income to an upper middle income country, aligned with the best practices in economic development, featuring market-oriented reform and integration with the global market. So the reform gets institutions ready for the market to play a decisive role in resources allocation and for the government to better fix market failures, while the opening up integrates China into the world, learning from our international friends, advanced counterparts, and benefiting from multinationalism and globalization with a free trade and mobilization of labor's capitals and ideas. So looking back, I think there are 4 meaningful points in this process I want to share with you today. So I think it's a little bit late for me. Hopefully I'm a journalist to know what I'm saying, okay? So firstly, so China reform got started from the rural areas in a pragmatic way. This was based on the fact that China had a large number but a poor rural population at that time. So the reform unleashed surplus labor, the rural labor, into the process of urbanization and industrialization. So providing job opportunities for them to integrate it into cities in a very gradual way. Secondly, I think China's urban reform was a pilot in special economic and trade zone in the coast areas. So the pilot programs combine foreign direct investment, advanced technology, and China's cheap labor, large domestic market together, so which substantially helped China unleash the growth potential along the way. Third, I think the RJ and Christiana already said, I think the roads leads to riches. So this is a household slogan in China. The Chinese government has made it happen with a lot of investment into the infrastructure. So now there's a complete infrastructure such as roads, highways, high-speed railways, and the ports, airports, electricity grids, and online infrastructure connect remote areas to the business and make life better and convenient. I have a good example. So if you want to buy the agricultural food in the remote western areas in China, it takes only 2 days to deliver to my door in Beijing. So that's the good example how you can use this online digital infrastructure to connect people, which creates more opportunities for people, for their better life, for growth. Fourthly, I think the education is prioritized both for households and the government. So Chinese people firmly believe knowledge can change one's destiny. And this is, to some extent, explains why there are so many tiger mothers in China. So similarly, the Chinese government pays high attention to education. So since 2012, the increase of China's government expenditure on education each year is no less than 4% of GDP. So in short, the better education, better human capital. So better human capital, better development. So that's the 4 features I want to mention today. And if there is anything I want to share with our low-income countries' governments, I think there's 2 points I want to mention today. So first, I think the right incentives to all market players, particularly the enterprises, I think that's important. Economic development is a function of the decisions making by all entrepreneurs on a daily basis. So right decision need right incentives, including the property rights protection, equal market access, so fair competition, transparency, good information disclosure and accounting system, legal systems, etc. So we have made, and we are still making great efforts in this regard to create the better business environment. Second, I think for the government, it's very important to well address 2 kinds of relationships. The first one is try to strike the balance between economic development and environmental protection. Like other countries, China once took a pattern of growth first, a cleanup later, a kind of growth at the cost of the environment. So the treatment after pollution is costly. So with a household slogan by President Xi, so lucid water and lush mountains are invaluable assets, and the twin carbon targets, So China now is in a green journey to a high quality development. So last weekend, actually, RJ and I went to Hebei provinces in China for a field visit. So a completely environmental protection project supported by the World Bank. It's a very impressive that a monitoring on soil, water, and air, so early warning and emergency response system has been set up under the project. So I believe with advanced technology and international supports, so low-income countries can avoid the old patterns. So another balance is a balance between the current economic development needs and the long-term physical sustainability. At the early stage of development, there's a huge demand of investment. So prioritize those on agenda, considering the physical constraints. So excessive borrowing without the rational analysis is harmful in the medium term and in the long run. So I think this is another important balances I want to mention today. So I stop here, and thank you for your attention, and we can continue discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Liao. And yes, we have some follow-up questions and maybe even some from the audience for those very, very useful contributions. Let me now turn to a second round with Minister Wadagni from Benin. And in fact, you already mentioned that Benin's reform program is centered around the Sustainable Development Goals. And you have a plan about how you're going to monitor and achieve the goals. But we know that not all the goals are equally achievable. And we're making different rates of progress along different ones of the goals. So I'd like to hear from you, which are the most problematic SDGs? And what are you doing and what can we do to help accelerate progress on some of those more difficult SDGs?
Okay, thank you very much. I think with all the shocks we just mentioned, we are seeing now a global shift on the timeline for meeting the SDGs. So let me give an example. The SDG number 6, making sure that we provide drinking water to everybody. Our initial target was to reach the that SDG by 2025. And thanks to World Bank support, we got close to $300 million support from World Bank, plus support from other partners, and plus our own domestic revenue. We actually set the plan and we were on track to reach the SDG number 6 by 2025 instead of 2030. But what's happened is, first, with the slowdown in the global economy, that means less growth compared to the planned level of growth, so less revenue mobilized. The second thing is logistical constraint and issue causing the delay of the equipment that we are importing to address, to build the water system to make sure that we provide water to people. And then the third reason is that we have to prioritize some of our public spending to address the consequences of global inflation. So due to those three things, we are seeing a global shift in the timeline. So now, what are we doing and what help do we need to make sure that we catch up with the timeline? So not all the timeline can be, we cannot catch up on everything, but we believe that by doing a couple of things, we can actually try to catch up some of the delay. For the SDG number 6, the initial delay we're seeing now is 2 years. So we believe that by doing the right thing, we may be able to still reach the SDG number 6 by 2027 instead of 2025. So what are we planning to do? One is the acceleration of our program on domestic revenue mobilization. I mean, we have no choice but keep doing it. Over the last 3 years, we managed to increase domestic revenue mobilization by around 65 to 70%. But the goal is for the next 3 years to double the domestic revenue we're collecting, but we have to do it. Second thing is we are now thinking about how we can attract private sectors to join government effort to reaching the SDGs. one example for, again, the SDG number 6, what we're trying to do now is creating a framework that allow private sector to come. We're giving them some incentive, fiscal incentive, so that they can come do the investment. And then by providing the water, the price coming from selling the water will allow, the private sector to recover the investment. So thinking about innovative approach and attracting private sectors to join effort with the government, so that together we can reach things. Now, the third thing is to make sure that we maintain like a solid macroeconomic framework, so that the market will continue trusting us. IMF and World Bank will continue supporting us, so that we can have additional resources, to address them. Because when you think about it, we're not at the base. We didn't cause most of the shocks, but the shock has diverted some of the money to other things, supporting the poorest people, etc. So, as a matter of fact, we will need at some point more resources from our own effort, but also from our partners such as IMF and World Bank, to make sure that we catch up with the delay and the initial timeline of reaching the SDGs.
Much. Let me turn to Minister Daves de Souza from Angola, and I'm going to deviate a little bit from the prepared questions here because it's such an interesting topic. You talked about the fact that Angola is a resource-rich country, and something like 50% of government revenue comes from oil. In that context, how do you have particular difficulties with what Kristalina and Ajay were talking about, and Manuela and Guillaume, which is domestic resource mobilization? Because if you get 50% from oil, the incentives to then increase taxes is that much less. And taxes are, let's face it, taxes are politically very unpopular. So how do you manage this push for greater domestic resource mobilization in the face of high oil revenues?
Thank you. Well, one important step was the implementation of VAT. We understand that now we have a strong contribution coming from VAT. We also implemented the special consumption tax on alcohol, tobacco, and this also helps. We are now doing a strong work in terms of the property tax, because we have a large margin of increase our revenue on that part of our taxes, considering the properties that are not properly registered, are not properly on the radar, under the radar from the state. Something that is also critical that we are addressing is the informal sector. Of course, we have like a subsistency business, ladies selling small products. We are not tackling this now. We are looking for to the distribution part of the business, storage and groceries, that they looks formal, but they act like informal. So it's the shadow economy that we are addressing with our tax administration to capture that revenues that we are not capturing. So the informal sector is also very heavy in our economy, and this also are not helping. Despite all this that we are already doing to increase our domestic revenues and also increase the efficiency of our tax administration, more digital systems, calibrate the process of fiscalizations, using artificial intelligence to help us to see where to tackle. We are working on all this, but the heart of the challenge is how our economy is structured. Even in the formal sector, the trade is more heavy. So we need to create the right incentives to see more happening in other sectors apart from oil, apart from trade.
Yes.
So again, agribusiness, we need to attract local investors, foreign investors, tell them that we have a lot of opportunities to export to the neighboring countries, and also to address our own fragilities in terms of bureaucracy, in terms of logistics capacity, and in terms of transports and roads. So that's why I said that we need to conciliate the cities where we are already working in terms of putting the infrastructures, and where the opportunities are with people that are already doing business on that side in terms of agribusiness, and having some results, and scale it up, those initiatives. On the domestic revenues is what we are doing, but of course all of this will pay off more as soon we make our economy performing better and becoming more robust and more diversified. But that are not refraining us of already optimizing the structure that we have in place, and some of the reforms that we implemented when we were under a program with IMF.
Thanks very much, Minister. Now let me turn to Mr. Liao. You described very well the things that China did in order to move from a low-income country to a upper-middle-income country. So my question is, what is China doing today to help current low-income countries adopt some of these policies and promote some of these changes so that they can actually also enjoy the rapid growth and poverty reduction that China did?
Okay, thank you, Santa. I think I want to share three aspects. So first, I think we at China support more international development assistance to low-income countries. So as the major shareholders of MDBs, such as the World Bank, Asian Development Bank, and International Fund for Agricultural Development, so China has contributed within its own capacity to IDA, IDF, IFAD, encourage these traditional MDBs to increase their support to low-income countries. And then China has also set up several funding facilities in these MDBs, so with the purpose to promote the poverty reduction and sustainable development in ways of capacity building and knowledge sharing. So these facilities are seed funding as well as mobilize more resources to South-to-South cooperation. So as the key initiator of the AIIB and the New Development Bank, so establishment of this new MDBs complements the current international development cooperation system. So as the initiator of the Belt Road initiatives, so we try to enhance the global connectivities. So investments was nearly $1 trillion stimulated, and we have got stimulated 420,000 jobs, and nearly 40 million people lived out of the poverty. And also the MCDF is established with the World Bank and other international financial institutions. We provide grants to the infrastructure connectivity projects in countries along the Belt and Road. As the initiatives, the global development, security, and the civilization initiatives, so we try to cope with the global challenges, address the deficit in development, and overcome security challenges and enhance mutual learning. The second aspect, I think, is that we China encourage more Chinese enterprises to go abroad and invest and operate in low-income countries. Because we believe all the Chinese entrepreneurs just come out of the poverty, so they know how to change the life with their own hands. So I think their development experiences are quite fresh, and this is relevant to the low-income countries at the current stage. So I think the Chinese enterprises actually has played an important role in China's development, and I believe they will play an active role in low-income countries as well. So they can contribute direct investment, technology transfer, and create the more job opportunities, hire more local workers. And also they can participate in capacity building. And also they can make a contribution to the institutional building. And also they can help to upgrade the infrastructures in all these low-income countries. So simply put, I think the Chinese enterprises going abroad will increase the aggregate demand, aggregate global demand and supply, and create new opportunities worldwide. The third areas I want to mention is China made a great efforts to support the low-income countries to address their sovereign debt issues. So China attached great importance to these areas in the global high interest rate context. So China actively participate in the discussion on the debt issues in G20 financing track and the Global Sovereignty Debt Roundtable. So along with other G20 members, China has endorsed the DSSI and actively implement DSSI. So now I can say that China actually maybe the #1 contribution so far in terms of the DSSI. We actually account for 44% of the total debt deferral, and also being an important participant in the debt treatment of country-specific cases on the common framework. So we try our best to make our efforts to help all the low-income countries. And so working closely with IMF, World Bank, and the G20 presidency, Brazil, we try to quicken the pace to support and solve the debt issues with some countries. As Tatiana just mentioned, before this discussion, these activities, we just finished the roundtable discussion the first time in this year among the deputy ministers. Okay, so I stop here.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Minister. I'm afraid we're run out of time for any more questions. So all that's left for me is to really thank the ministers and the participants for a very, I think, a very candid discussion. I appreciate both the success stories that we have seen, the progress that's being made, but also an honest acknowledgement of the challenges ahead. And I think that's giving us a rich agenda going forward, and in particular would feed nicely into the second session, which is on how the international community can support these policy reforms, both the ones that are working and the ones that need more work. So let me thank Minister Wadagni, Minister Davis de Souza, and Minister Liao for a very informative and candid discussion. And we now, I think, will take a break before we move to the next session. Oh, yeah, the MC will tell us that.
Thank you very much, Professor Devarajan, and the panelists for this thought-provoking discussion. And indeed, you have already summed up the session. Not much to add there. The next session, indeed, will talk about what the international community can do to help and support the low-income countries in their efforts. But now let's take a short break, 10 minutes, and see you back in the seats at 10:50. Thank you. So I hope you enjoyed your break, even if it was a short one. And I think we can start our second session. So next on our agenda, we will explore the role of international community in supporting the low-income countries in pursuing their policy efforts and their path to the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. This next panel will be led by Masoud Ahmed, President of the Center for Global Development, which is based here in Washington, D.C. Just like in the previous session, you can post your questions. Unfortunately, in the previous session, there was no time to ask them, but hopefully this time we'll make it to ask some questions from the audience. Mr. Ahmed, over to you to introduce the panel.
Thank you very much, Andrea. And sorry for your break being shortened, but at least I hope everybody managed to get coffee. So we have 55 minutes now, and the previous session was really about what countries could be doing in terms of dealing with the challenges that lie ahead. And now there's a nice segue, actually, with the last intervention about what China's doing. It's a very good segue into this one, which is really, what is the international community? What can the international community do to support countries in the difficult challenges that so many of the low-income countries face going forward? We have a great panel, which I hope they are all on screen. This is a somewhat surreal experience where everybody else is on screen, but I'm sitting here, so I advise you to look at the screen, then you'll be able to get a sense of homogeneity. So we have four panelists. We have Riccardo Barbieri Hermit, who is the Director General of the Treasury, Italian Treasury. And then we also have Abdul Mohsen Al-Khalaf. I don't see Mr. Al-Khalaf, but he's online also. Who is the Assistant Minister of Finance of Saudi Arabia. So you have two representatives who will provide a perspective from being partners in the international community of low-income countries. And you have two more panelists. You have Mr. Njuguna Ndungu, who is the Minister of Finance of Kenya, and Kenya has been very much recently in the news in terms of trying to find a way forward on dealing with some difficult financing issues, so we'll hear from him. And Hanan Morsi. Hanan Morsi is the Deputy Executive Secretary and Chief Economist of UNECA, and also an alumna of the IMF. In fact, Hanan used to work in the IMF as well. So before we go to bring them in, we have two presenters who are going to take 5 minutes to sort of lay out the issues. So we have Manuela Francisco from the World Bank and Guillaume Chabert from the fund. And let me hand over to them first to just share a couple of slides, and then we'll go right into the panelists. So over to you, Manuela.
Thank you. I will start with some good news. Public debt levels have stabilized. In addition, some low-income countries and lower middle-income countries have started to tap into the international capital markets. Benin, Cote d'Ivoire, and Kenya have issued bonds to refinance maturing debt. Now, the bad news. Public debt levels stabilized at very high levels. And that's what we see in this chart. Currently, more than half of the low-income countries are already in debt distress or at high risk of debt distress. And this compares with less than 30% in 2019. Moreover, low-income countries will pay this year about $76 billion in external public debt service. If we add domestic service, this will add up to $185 billion. This is roughly equivalent to 7.5% of their combined GDP. These numbers, so that you have a bit of perspective here, this number number, 7.5%, is on average higher than the combined budgets of health, education, and infrastructure. And this happens at the time when countries, as we heard, need to redouble their efforts towards sustainable development goals and need more funding for climate action. And as debt service is going up, what we can see is that disbursements from all but multilaterals are going down. Disbursements from official bilaterals and especially from private creditors are coming down quickly. This chart has a very strong message. What is really telling us is that strong and robust multilateral support will be needed. Domestic resource mobilization is critical. International capital markets will be very helpful, but this will not be enough to cover all the development needs. A large and strong IDA 21 will be critical to help countries address the current challenge, but also to support them towards their medium and long-term development goals. In addition, that will also be important so that we can scale up the results that we are already achieving. And just to mention two results of the current IDA portfolio. With this current portfolio, we are expected to have 120 million more people with access to electricity and 75 million more people with access to water and sanitation. And this just to give two numbers and two results, because there are many more. Thank you very much. Over to you, Guillaume.
Thank you very much, Manuel. So let me turn to Guillaume.
Thank you, Masoud. So on the IMF side, we are supporting low-income countries through policy advice, capacity development and technical assistance, and of course also lending. We scaled up significantly the level of lending to low-income countries in recent years to help them navigate the challenges emanating from the very, very significant shocks of COVID-19 and the commodity price shock and global monetary tightening in 2022 and 2023. So fund lending increased nearly fivefold in recent years relative to pre-pandemic levels, as you see on the chart. Also, if you can look more in details at the charts, you would find out that at the peak of the pandemic in 2020, that's the green bar, we lent mainly through in the form of quick disbursing emergency financing to support immediate crisis response. And as the pandemic receded, we turned progressively to longer-term programs to support reforms and help countries navigate the recovery. That's a blue bar, what we call the ECF. However, such a strong response since 2020 has eroded the resources of the Poverty Reduction and Growth Trust, the PRGT, which is the vehicle for the IMF concessional lending. So the high level of lending in recent years has reduced the long-term self-sustained lending capacity of this trust for the future. And we just start the review of the PRGT to making sure that the fund can continue to provide adequate financial support to low-income countries in the future, while ensuring the financial viability of the trust. Last slide on debt. Manuel started with a good news, which is that debt stock are kind of stabilizing, but debt service are still a challenge. Globally, debt vulnerabilities remain elevated in low-income countries, and the multi-pronged approach that the bank and the fund that started to unfold a few years ago is still very much required to address these challenges. So we are working, bank and fund, together on several fronts. We just initiated the review of the Debt Sustainability Framework for Low-Income Countries, the LIC-DSF, to keep the framework up to date with the changing nature of the debt vulnerabilities, the debt landscape, also the analytical advances. We are also providing strong support, bank and funds, to the G20 Common Framework, the actual debt restructuring, but also to support progresses in the rules, standards, timelines, processes to ensure greater credibility and timelines. And this is very much what we're also trying to do through the Global Sovereign Debt Roundtable that the fund, the bank, and the G20 presidency launched last year. And lastly, but not the least, we are also working together to enhance debt transparency, strengthen debt management capacity, in particular through the debt management facility. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Guillaume. Thank you, Manuel, also. So let us now, I think you've nicely laid out issues on liquidity, on debt, where we are on debt management, and the importance of ensuring that we have adequate resources, both in the IDA replenishment coming up, IDA 21, and also through the PRGT, and you might also say actually the RST. Okay, so now let's go from that to our panelists, and I want to make sure that all 4 of our panelists are there, and yes, they are. So welcome to all of you. Great to have you online. And I'm going to jump right in. I hope you were all online to be able to see the presentations as well. But let me jump right in. I'm going to start with Mr. Barbieri. And this is really a little bit, Ricardo, a question that carries over from the previous session a little bit also, which is we talked about the importance of domestic policy reforms in the previous session. And of course, one of the roles of the international community is not just to provide financial support, but also to provide the experience across countries on policies, what works, what doesn't, and in that context, help to build capacity within countries, developing countries, to be able to formulate and implement policies in support of their economic and social agenda. So I want to start with asking you, how do you see the role of the international community, Ricardo, in providing this support on policy reforms? Are there any things that strike you in particular? And can I just say, since you're going to be the first of the speaker, that if we're going to be able to do 2 rounds with the speakers, then allow for some time for questions, it'd be great if each of you could keep your answers to 3 minutes or less, and then I'll come back for more. So over to you, Ricardo.
Sure. Thank you. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Thank you for the invitation. I'll go right into the question that you posed, which is quite interesting. Obviously, I think today we have a problem of macroeconomic stability that must be addressed. And also we are facing challenges related to climate change. But in terms of the so-called structural reforms, I think that's obviously a huge field, but how should we approach it? Now, my own view is that there are some general prescriptions, some general guidelines, but then it's always important to study very in depth the reality of each country. There can be commonalities, but some of the countries we are dealing with, some of the leaks are energy producing countries, others are not, some of them rely on tourism, many of them on farming. So the realities are quite different, and so is the institutional capacity. So I think there's definitely a question of sequencing for reforms, and the most important ones are, in my opinion, the ones that strengthen the institutional capacity, ability of countries to spend whatever resources they have efficiently to combat, contain corruption, and be able to increase tax revenue. Of course, in a way that we should be fair and maintaining progressivity, for example. So how can we help in that effort? Of course, the international organizations are the primary actors in this, but I think there are also bilateral initiatives that can be useful in improving capacity. For example, in our case, Italy has joined since the outset the Addis tax initiative, signing a commitment to increase the resources allocated to technical assistance for strengthening taxation and in general tax systems. But we also have a good track record in anti-money laundering and the tax agency. And that we have a training facility near Rome that is open to foreign officials. I think these cases, these fields can be quite important and quite useful in developing capacity. So my answer to your question is, when I read the reports from the IMF, the World Bank, I agree with most of the suggestions and the recommendations. My own view is that we need to emphasize the specificity of each country, get into a very deep analysis, and provide also some bilateral support whenever we have expertise in a given area. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So good to have general policy ideas and advice, but make sure that we ground it in the specificities of each country. And you also wanted to emphasize issues relating to public expenditure management and revenue mobilization. So we'll come back to those points, I'm sure. Let me turn now to Mr. Ndungu, who, if I could have your perspective, particularly on how the international community can help countries like Kenya and others that have to cope more and more with shocks that are more frequent, deeper. The managing director of the IMF has repeatedly made the point that we're going to be living in a world that's going to be prone to more shocks. How can the international community, how can the IMF, for example, help countries deal with shocks while also ensuring that this help doesn't come at the expense of supporting their longer-term development and growth agenda? So your perspective on that, and again, as succinctly as you can do it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And indeed, I'm very happy to be invited to this meeting, and I thank Kristalina and President Ajay for this. And I'm happy that I've listened to quite some interesting debate since this started. But I'm very happy that it is actually in confirmation, or it comes close to actually some of the experiences we are having in the African scene. But it also emphasizes some of the areas that we really need to push on. In terms of answering your question, Masood, that I'm very happy to see you. Let me make 2 points. And the first point is about strategy, and the second point is about interventions. With the first point, I do believe that economic recovery for low-income countries, middle-income countries, and even middle-income countries should be a strong focus on 4 areas in terms of my own thinking, and that for me is quite important. And the first one really talks about human capital development, and the African scene is a good example. We have covered most of this, especially from my area work in the African Economic Research Consortium. And the first area in terms of human capital development is to look at the education system, to look at health and health infrastructure, to look at the labor market and nutrition outcome. It will tell you that there has been a major institutional failure problem. Right. We did not realize, but we also didn't realize how pervasive it is. And that also goes down to the second point about markets. Markets failed because they were failed by the institutions. And institutional failure problems drove to policy failure. And you look at in most countries where poverty has really been rampant and even growth has not really even woken and requires structural changes, markets have failed. We need to move into a different direction of even restructuring the global value chain, something that we have argued in G20, for example. And so many other aspects that will make resuscitate markets, and how to develop markets is going to become very, very important, and especially in African economies that are agricultural based, where aggregation is very, very important and value addition becomes very, very important. The third point, which has actually come several times, is actually domestic resource mobilization. It's a whole family of reforms that we need here in terms of fiscal strategy and tax policy. And also this one is also going to be supported by revenue generation and even revenue management. And finally, in this area, we need to adopt the technological evolution. In my earlier life, I talked about digitization, especially payment system, but we went further and showed that actually it can introduce and coordinate most of these three areas that I've talked about. It can create efficiency, ease of entry, even catch up. And more importantly, the fourth industrial revolution is actually going to be generated from there. That is important as a strategy. But the second point is actually interventions. Once we take up the strategy in those four areas, then we need some interventions to help come through some of the areas that we have really even covered here. And one of them has been discussed is actually resolving the debt distress. And this debt distress is a combination of both external and domestic debt. Domestic debt, and I think Masood was asking me about how we resolved, especially the Eurobond, which was threatening. But the most important thing is also the domestic debt. It actually is quite pervasive because it's a crowding out story, which is an extreme form of Dutch disease. It becomes quite problematic. And what we have seen is that this has also been pushed to a further limit by the layers and layers of negative and persistent shocks in the recent years. And we have seen the kind of outcome it has given us. So in a sense, you cannot even talk about economic recovery without resolving the debt situation. The second one is, which African countries have suffered, is actually risk profiling and even risk mitigation. We've suffered because most of the interest structure of this debt, especially external debt, has actually been influenced by ratings, credit rating. And so essentially the risk profiling has become quite negative. It's an intervention we really need to think about. The third point is something that President Andrzej Banga has really talked about. He called it big bet. But for me, it's a big push, where it's a big push that we want to look at climate action and opportunities that comes with it. We can start from RAND, renewable energy. In Kenya, for example, renewable energy is about 93%, and agricultural revolution and transformation. Whichever way you start, whether you start with the renewable energy, you go to land, you go to agriculture, it's going to be a it's a low-hanging fruit. And it's one that can give us the big push that we would like to have.
Thank you.
But finally, and more importantly, we need the resource infusion. And this is where we have had debate about the global financial architecture. We are even coming up with the IDA 21 replenishment. I'm happy that with the request of the World Bank, the President of Kenya, His Excellency, President William Ruto, has accepted to champion IDA 21 replenishment. The whole idea is we can actually say what are the priorities in Africa and other developing countries and other low middle income countries. Can we turn those priorities into actually a form of agenda? And we actually say that for us to succeed, we need to give the MDBs the critical capacity that they require. And IDA replenishment is one of those capacities that the World Bank requires to salvage the low income countries, the low middle income countries, and even the middle income countries from stagnation. And it's going to be very, very important.
Thank you.
But also in Kenya, we have moved in the other direction of trying to go into other markets. Sorry for that. Go into other markets. We have gone into try to enter markets like the Chinese markets with Panda Board, Japanese market with Samurai Board, and the Middle East markets with Sukuk markets, just to diversify that kind of thing. It's an intervention that the international community is going to support, is supporting us, so that we can actually move away from this quagmire, because we have the strategy, but that strategy must be supported by resource infusion. I hope I wanted to summarize those 2 points. Sorry for taking more time. Thank you very much.
No problem. But I'll come back maybe in the second round to the question about going to financial markets and could link it a bit to the liquidity issues that so many countries are facing. But thank you also for raising the point that there has to be a strategy, but then there have to be some follow-up key interventions that can serve as triggers for moving forward. Thank you for that. Let me now bring Hanan Morsi in. Hanan, I want to ask you particularly, you've been inside many organizations. You've been in the IMF, you've been in EBRD, you've been in the African Development Bank, you've been in ECA. And I think you are now seeing a lot of organizations internationally providing support or doing different things. Sometimes they're complementary, sometimes they're overlapping. And I want to get a little bit your frank perspective from where you sit about how do you see the complementarity of, let's narrow it down to, say, the World Bank and the IMF in terms of the support they provide. Are there things that you think that only the fund can provide from where you sit? Are there things that the World Bank is best at providing? Do you have any advice to all the people sitting in this room who are trying to design their next programs of support as to where you think that complementarity should go?
Thank you very much, Masoud, and it's a great pleasure to be with you in this very important discussion. Let me frame my response in terms of what are needed for African low-middle income countries from the international community, and then how do the IMF and World Bank come. So what is needed to support African low-income countries are three things. One is having affordable finance at scale. Two is crowding in the private sector. And three is resolving the debt challenges that these countries are facing. And both institutions that play, the IMF and the World Bank, play critical role in these areas. So for the availing more affordable finance at scale, we do need the bigger and better multinational development banks. And for that, we need to have the balance sheets stretched. We need to have better resourced MDBs and well capitalized. But very importantly, we also need more concessional financing. And here there is the need to really ensure that we have scaling up of the concessional financing windows at both the IMF and the World Bank and enhance their complementarity. So we need to ensure that the scaling up of IDA to make sure that there is sufficient resources to meet the ever-increasing financing needs from the low-income countries, and for the IMF BRJT to massively scale up the support to low-income countries, and to also look into in terms of funding that from internal resources, from net income, and also considering wholesales for the medium term. And what we really also need is for the sum to be greater than its parts. We need to see more synergies, collaboration, and a catalytic role of the IMF and the World Bank in not only with bringing their expertise, technical assistance, and financing, but we need to see that crowding in other forms of financing from other multilateral development banks, from other resources, and by bringing in crowding in the private sector. It has to be in an ecosystem that really brings transformational change. We want to move beyond the piecemeal approach of tackling small parts, but without creating, a transformational impact on the countries. And in terms of being catalytic in mobilizing other resources, let me highlight, for example, there has been this proposal that has been put forward by the African Development Bank and by the Inter-American Development Bank, and have a number of donor special drawing rights donor countries, holders that are supporting the proposal to actually be able to rechannel, the IMF SDRs to multilateral development banks so that they can create leverage. We have had this proposal for almost 2 years, but we haven't moved to implementation. We need to have these type of initiatives and proposals that can actually create scale progress further. And we need to also make sure that there is crowding in of the private sector. And here, it's important to, use the resilience and sustainability facility, for example, at the IMF, to provide a framework, a green framework, and reform measures that can actually attract private green financing, and that can be possible with collaboration and technical assistance from both the IMF and the World Bank, and to actually function, or the facility to function as a catalyst to bring other financing and as a policy instrument to facilitate, for example, swapping more expensive debt and mobilizing other credit enhancement from the World Bank, but also from other entities. And it's a very timely, given that the World Bank is now, for example, looking at the guarantee reform, its own guarantee reform. So we have a great opportunity to do more of that to bring scale.
Thank you. Thank you very much on that one. Maybe just one point that I take away from what you said. It's important that when we sit inside the World Bank and the IMF, we often tend to think of these two institutions as being the international community. In many ways, two between them do provide a very leadership role. But more and more, what I'm discovering is that there's a whole community of public development banks that are becoming larger and larger players. And I think one of the issues that we have to try to grapple with is how do you create more of a common or shared approach to supporting countries through country platforms which work with a much larger set of and more diverse set of international partners. And that's a challenge that I think one will begin to see in many low-income countries. Now, the last panelist for the first round is Abdul Mohsen Al-Khalaf. And I want to turn to Mr. Al-Khalaf and get a bit your sense on, we've heard from almost every speaker the importance of adequately providing concessional financing, both through the PRGT and through IDA. In your view, what can be done to ensure that the adequate resources can be mobilized for both of these? And particularly, are there ways in which we might think of more creative solutions or different solutions for mobilizing these resources compared to the past? Any thoughts from you on that, please?
Thank you so much, Masood. It is a pleasure to participate in this important discussion. Indeed, as you highlighted, ensuring adequate resources for the PRGT and IDA is crucial for providing effective financial support to low-income countries, especially given the challenging economic landscape. During very difficult times, the PRGT and IDA have been the main sources of concessional financing for the countries most in need, and have acted as a cushion in the face of major economic shocks. COVID-19 and the geopolitical issues are case in point, where both instruments have helped low-income countries a great deal. With this in mind, let me share a few thoughts on how we can ensure adequate resources for the PRGT and IDA. First, I think we should continue with the traditional way. We must continue to encourage member countries to maintain their financial contributions to the PRGT and IDA. this including through the regular replenishment rounds and ad hoc funding support in response to global economic challenges. And in this context, I believe it is very important to find ways to broaden the donor base to include non-traditional donors, thereby increasing the pool of available resources. Second, I think we should advocate for the rechanneling of SDRs as a mean to support the PRGT and IDA, allowing these instruments to augment their lending capacity to low-income countries. And to give an example, Saudi Arabia has utilized this approach effectively, providing the largest loan contribution to the PRGT since the 2021 SDR allocation and the commencement of the 2021 PRGT fundraising round. Indeed, we rechanneled around 2.8 billion SDR to PRGT, and this is equivalent to around 22% of our allocation. Right. And this, of course, provided breathing space to PRGT to extend financing to low-income countries. Third, I think we must also look for more innovative means to ensure the financial adequacy during challenging times. One example of the innovative approaches is when IDA obtained the credit rating and went to the capital market. That helped IDA to leverage its balance sheet effectively and free up resources for low-income countries. And actually, IDA being innovative during the rounds of replenishments from time to time, including the recent work on the balance sheet optimization, make IDA unique and up to date in terms of addressing the challenges facing low-income countries. And that's why Saudi Arabia has been donor to IDA since 1977 when IDA 5 started. And then finally, I think a very important point to consider is for us collectively as a global community to seek a greater coordination and cooperation between multilateral development banks and financial institutions to optimize the use of resources and maximize the impact of the respective interventions. And also, I think for the specific case of the PRGT, there is ongoing review of its sustainability, and I believe the IMF will come up with some ideas that will help improve the sustainability of the PRGT. With this, I think both instruments are important and they deserve the support of the international community, including an accelerated push to make them more sustainable. Thank you, Masood.
Thank you so much, Abdul Mohsen. Thank you for those very specific ideas as well, and for your confidence in the staff of the IMF for coming up with creative solutions to make PRGT sustainable at a higher level of operations. So we'll all look forward to that. Now, I want to carry on with the same topic with Mr. Barbieri, and I want to come to you, Ricardo, to say, look, over the next year, there are going to be demands or requests for concessional financing for IDA replenishment, for subsidies of PRGT maybe, for Gavi coming up. And we all know that the budgets of donor countries, the sort of core donors that have been contributing to this, are quite strained. And And I want to get a bit your sense on how do you see all this playing out? There's one of my colleagues has recently written a blog from Center for Global Development, which is sort of saying, you know, are we heading towards a slow motion train crash of replenishments, a whole series of them just coming up one after the other? How do you think about this? Any ideas to build on top of what Mr. Al-Khalaf just said? And just to remind people that we actually have only 15 minutes now left. So just a quick thought on each, please. Over to you, Ricardo.
Okay. Thank you. Well, I think the previous speakers have already covered some of the key issues. Here we have, the way we see it is we have one important goal, which is to complete the reform and increase the efficiency of multilateral development banks. And we welcome the progress that has been made by the World Bank in this field as being quite important. And then we have the field of concessional financing with the PRGT, IDA being obviously the key items on the agenda. I think it's a question of making the use of resources as efficient as possible, and then persuading obviously the donors to commit resources. Our view is that these resources, as I said before, there's definitely a question of how efficiently these resources are used. The theme of climate change is quite important, and it has concrete implications for many of the countries that we aim to support. And so we think focusing the resources in certain areas is equally important. But I also agree with what has been said about the need to broaden the donor base, to continue with the rechanneling of SDRs as important points. And I would also like to mention, given that many of the leaks are African countries, that in addition to our efforts to coordinate these policies as G7 presidency, Italy has launched its own program for Africa called the Piano Mattei. And the idea there is that Mattei, a few decades ago, was the CEO of our energy company, Eni, and he believed that the key to a successful relationship and you know, to enhance the energy procurement was to really promote and empower energy producing countries, notably in Africa. And so this Piano Mattei aims to combine national resources with the expertise of some of the development banks that already have operated in Africa for a long time. And we hope to bring on board additional countries. We think once you know, the aim is clear, and it's clear that some of these projects can be transformative. For example, clean energy production, the local use of it, including for agriculture, but also the transportation of energy towards Europe, can be a driver of development for African countries. And also that can you know, help us manage migration flows in a way that will be inclusive and balanced. So we attach a very high importance, a critical importance to the policy vis-a-vis Africa in particular. And then I will close by saying we also think it's important to continue to make progress in the works of the Global Sovereign Debt Roundtable, in implementing and enhancing the common framework. And there are ideas about how to support some of these countries, at least in getting or regaining access to the global markets, because we can mobilize also private credit flows, investments, we are much more likely to be successful. and so we think anything that allows countries to resolve their debt problems and to return or access the global markets are also a key focus for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for making the link with the private capital in different forms. And let me go straight on that point to Mr. Ndungu. I want to come back to you because Kenya successfully managed a liquidity crunch earlier a few months ago. And what role do you think that the IMF and the World Bank played in helping you to do that? What's the prospect that you see for accessing private capital markets, and will it be on terms that are affordable, or will it be on terms that 3 or 4 years down the road will come back and create problems in terms of repayments and sustainability? Any quick reaction to that?
Thank you very much. Yes, I have some quick reactions. I think we have an IMF program, and right now we are actually covering the 7th review. And we also have we have just finished almost finalizing the World Bank DPO6. A combination of both was a very strong signaling in terms of policy credibility in Kenya. And that was very, very much helpful, and especially when we were looking for how could we refinance the Eurobond. That is very, very important for us because as we continue driving this, policy credibility becomes very, very important. The second point is actually to say, while we were refinancing the Eurobond, one of the things was trying to say, what benefits are we going to get by refinancing through the market? First is because the market can communicate the story about the policy credibility. There's nothing that is going to help us. At the very end, the domestic policy regime is not appropriate for debt, should I say, debt sustainability. And that for us is very, very important. So the market, refinancing through the market and the policy credibility that I've just talked about helped us to solve 2 problems. One, the escalating inflation, which was actually being fueled by the depreciation of the nominal exchange rate, which had a very strong pass-through effect. And obviously, in a country like ours, that creates a very, very likely factor on political backlash.
Right.
The second one was actually we managed to reorganize the maturity profile so that the future debt, we are not going to get such a large ticket of $2 billion where the market just reacts because of the size of the ticket. Those 2 advantages becomes very, very important so that the maturity profile gives us a breathing space. But then at the end of that breathing space, what are we going to use it for? One is to fix the fiscal side, expenditure prioritization. But more importantly, the domestic policies must be fixed so that we actually create a better environment. From where I started by talking about strategy. That strategy is about economic recovery. That strategy is about creating a sustainable environment, policy environment for private sector to thrive and domestic production and even markets to work. And that is where we believe that at the end of the day, that will be the winning point. So I do believe that in the short term, we have this support from the IMF and the World Bank. And of course, we dealt with the liquidity issue. It was a liquidity issue. It was not a solvency issue. But the way you solve a liquidity crisis must be consistent that it does not create any solvency challenge or ignite any solvency challenge.
Right.
That for us is very, very important, and we are very happy about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I must say the core point that at the end of the day is the credibility of the policy regime and the signaling role that comes from having the IMF and the World Bank providing support to that helps to build the kind of profile that enables you to successfully then access markets on terms that are more attractive. Now, let me go back to Mr. Al-Khalaf, and debt has come up a lot, Mohsen, in this conversation in different ways. And I want to get a bit your sense as a creditor, as a participant in the G20, as a player in the sovereign debt roundtable. Where do you see this going next? I mean, we've kind of seen what's come through these different mechanisms, the advantages. We've also seen that there's still some shortcomings. Over the next year or so, what do you see as the big priority for moving forward to make the system a bit more streamlined and function more effectively?
Thanks so much, Masood. The issue of debt vulnerabilities in low-income countries is indeed a complex and pressing one. It demands our attention, our understanding, and our action. It is our collective responsibility to work towards a sustainable solution towards this issue. Probably at the beginning of this session, the IMF and the World Bank presented some findings, and they show that almost more than 50% of low-income countries are either in or at high risk of debt distress. In addition, and as highlighted by the Minister of Finance of Kenya, nearly half of the world's population lives in countries that spend more on interest expenses than on education or health. And this is unacceptable and is a direct threat to efforts to make progress on the sustainable development goals. So reducing these deep-rooted vulnerabilities require joint efforts from all stakeholders. It cannot be solved unilaterally or bilaterally. So Saudi Arabia has been increasing its efforts to support low-income countries in dealing with debt vulnerabilities. In 2020, during our presidency of the G20, Saudi Arabia has led the DSSI initiative, and which released almost 13 billion to 48 countries at the height of the pandemic. And this provided much needed liquidity relief. But as the Minister of Kenya mentioned, this is a liquidity support measure rather than a sovereign providing the solutions for a solvency issue. So to maintain the momentum, we wanted to ensure a way forward beyond DSSI before the end of our presidency of the G20 in 2020. We worked with G20 members and many stakeholders, including the IMF and the World Bank, and the G20 Common Framework was established. And I would like to note that the Common Framework is a relatively young platform, and even though it may have faced some challenges, it has also achieved notable results. Now, we recognize that we learn as we go with the Common Framework, and we are pleased with the cases of Chad and Zambia and the progress made on the other cases. But the Common Framework is the only platform that we have currently that bring together traditional donor and non-traditional donor to agree on debt treatment on equal footing. So it is essential that we maintain our collective efforts to build on the recent progress and institutionalize the implementation of the G20 Common Framework. There are many ideas on how to do that, and Ricardo highlighted some of these, but the importance is the political will to make the G20 Common Framework work. Likewise, our discussion as part of the Global Sovereign Debt Roundtable have been very professional and beneficial and insightful, because it has helped participants to understand divergent views on various technical issues concerning debt treatment, and trying to bring people or countries together on the same page on different technical issue. So we believe that these discussions should continue with all stakeholders, including private creditors, borrowing countries, credit rating agencies, and international financial institutions, so that we reach a consensus on the technical issues through the Global Sovereign Debt Roundtable to help us make tangible progress on sovereign debt. It also progress is moving very slowly. I'm optimistic that with the push from donor countries, with the, I would say, active participation from borrowing countries, we can continue to make progress as we have done with Chad and Zambia. Thank you, Masood.
Thank you so much. Now, Hanan, you are in touch with a lot of finance ministers from Africa on a regular basis, and I know the debt issue comes up in a lot of your meetings with them. From where you sit, how do you see now the next year on the sovereign debt roundtable, on the common framework, on moving ahead with making additional changes to make it function more effectively? What are the priorities that you would like to see pursued?
Thank you very much, Masood. And let me start by the sense that, of urgency that has been really highlighted, and echoed during our Conference of Ministers in Victoria Falls about the need for action to support African countries. And however, the response from generally the international community has not been matched by speed and scale. And I want to really take a human perspective to what is at stake. So if we're looking at African low-income countries, we're talking about 600 million people with a median age of less than 17 years, very young population, fast growing, about 3% population growth. Yet we have almost 2/3 the population of these countries basically without access to energy. And hence that affects development across the board. You cannot achieve most of the SDGs without having access to energy. And on top of that, you have most of these countries are highly vulnerable to climate change. And we've seen devastation caused by extreme weather shocks, whether it's in the Horn of Africa or droughts or floods in Mozambique and Malawi. So they are also hit by climate shocks, yet they have to face very difficult choices. Policymakers have to face a trade-off between servicing their debt or actually spending on social issues, investing in education, investing in health. And what is at stake is the future of this young population, their education, and their ability to find jobs in the future. The development and socio-economic stability of these countries depend on it. So that's kind of, I think we need to have, the human perspective of what is the cost of non-action. And we need to really tackle these issues because not only it's important for Africa, but because these also matter for the international community. Having adequate financing for countries where they have, young labor force and a growing population will be critical. And also supporting issues that relate to climate vulnerabilities, but also investing in the future where many of these countries have green minerals. They can play a key role and have huge potential in solar and renewables. So they can be a critical part of the prosperous future for the whole world. And we need to make sure that this happens. And part of what is needed, in addition to the financing issues that we've talked about earlier, is to really address the functioning of the debt resolution framework, to reform the G20 common framework so that we have a framework that is actually timely, predictable, transparent, and efficient. We need to introduce standstill of debt service upon application so that countries don't have to continue to pay debt service while the process takes too long, some countries 2 years. And we need to have comparability of treatment formula introduced And we need to also design the whole debt framework in a way that actually encourages preemptive debt restructuring when needed. We need to give incentives to tackle the problems before it's too late. Currently, we don't have that system. So we need to really realign the incentives to avoid really ending up with countries in debt distress and paying huge cost, not just financially, but also in terms of human cost to their citizens. So I think these are the type of issues that we need to really tackle, and we need to also incorporate and work on incorporating climate resilient clauses in sovereign and debt issuances across the board to make it universal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hanan, for giving us your specific ideas on debt. But actually, I want to thank you for putting the conversation on financing, bringing it back to the broader points about the human and development agenda that it's meant to serve. And I think it is a useful note on which to end this conversation, because it reminds us of what it is that all this financing discussion is about. It's not just about numbers, not about frameworks for sustainability of financial flows. It's really about how do you create a future of hope for that growing population of young people that currently live in conditions that they recognize as not being acceptable for them. And the implications of that are not just economic or social, but they're actually political and societal. And that's something that's important for us to just keep recognizing as you go about your important work every day. So I want to thank all of our panelists for their remarks. I apologize to the people who had questions, but we didn't have time to bring in additional questions into this session. And I want to thank all of you for your participation and engagement in this. So with that, let me bring this session to a close. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ahmed, and thanks to all the panelists in this session for a really rich discussion. So now we are coming to a close of this event, and we invite the IMF Deputy Managing Director, Antoinette Sayeh, and the World Bank Group Managing Director of Operations, Anna Bierde, to deliver their closing remarks.
Well, a very good end of the morning to everyone. It's almost the afternoon, and I thought Anna would be first, actually. Very much welcome doing this with her. It's really been our pleasure to host this very important event. I really want to start by thanking the moderators, thanking the panelists for all the time that they invested in it, the excellent conversations we've had in the panels, and for the valuable insights that will certainly provide much food for thought as we continue to work towards better supporting our low-income country members. And I wanted to use this opportunity to just flag a few takeaways for me from this morning. I think it's clear that as the theme for today well underscores, the rising to the challenges that our low-income country members face really takes a village and even a world to lift. And all of us have a very important role to play in that regard. I think in the first session, we certainly saw that strong domestic reforms are the driving force at the core of accelerating progress towards the SDGs. We heard in quite a bit of detail about the successes and challenges in implementing such reforms. And I think what we heard certainly leaves us with valuable lessons And from the discussions, I'd like to maybe flag three main messages. First, that sound macroeconomic policy remains at the cornerstone of sustained development. We heard that clearly from Benin and from Angola, from Kenya as well. And despite exceptional challenges, countries that persisted with strong policies withstood the multiple shocks we've seen in recent years relatively well. They were able to restore macroeconomic stability more quickly and eventually return to international markets, as have Benin, Kenya, and Cote d'Ivoire recently. Similarly, I think the example of Angola, which I was happy to visit in the last 2 weeks, shows how a resource-rich country faced by multiple shocks can actually maintain macro stability by pursuing sound policies. We heard also from Kenya about the importance of policy credibility. And I think a second takeaway is that well-planned reforms can truly transform countries. We heard this from China. We have a lot to take away from China's experience, as we heard this morning, truly inspiring for low-income countries who can learn from it and create their own success stories. I think the third takeaway was that donors, the international community, but donors play an important role in enhancing the capacity of low-income countries in taking forward these good macroeconomic policies. It requires capacity, it requires institutional strengthening, and technical assistance and training, crucial to that, coordinated appropriately between the providers of it is also very important, not to constrain the scarce capacity we're trying to build. And I think it's a good way to come to the second session, which focused on the role of the international community, including our own institution here at the IMF. And we're in the process, as everyone flagged, of reviewing, of course, our engagement with low-income countries and trying to make sure that the PRGT is well-resourced for the challenges ahead and continue to maintain support for them. And as we think through the reforms that we have to make, notably in terms of the concessional lending facilities, we will reflect on the very good ideas, the messages conveyed by the panelists. And here again, maybe three messages also that I took away. First, the fund support remains highly relevant, critical in some cases for low-income countries. The fund has a unique role, of course, in providing policy advice and capacity development, and in financing, of course, to help countries maintain or restore macro stability. And I think a number of people flagged the issue of the fund being a key catalytic source, bringing in other partners, bringing in other financing for countries. We are looking at how to better resource the PRGT and there are lots of discussions around the SDR rechanneling that has already helped the PRGT, and we continue to look at it as we go forward. I think the second takeaway is that the IMF support has to reflect country-specific conditions. There cannot be a one-size-fits-all, as we know. And this means that the fund needs to provide, of course, tailored support in the face of increasingly heterogeneous low-income countries. I think one example of how we do that is the new country engagement strategy we introduced to support our more fragile and conflict-affected states, making sure that we retain a long-term perspective in our support to those countries and take into account their country-specific underlying drivers of fragility. The fund clearly needs partners. We're in partnership across supporting our members in facing the many challenges they have. And we cannot work in isolation. Certainly we cannot work, any of us, on our own. And it means that we need to continue strengthening our collaboration, not only with our sister institution, the bank, but with all other partners as well. Lots of ideas about how we strengthen partnership and ensure complementarity, which is crucial in light of the constraints and the challenges our member countries face. We don't want to be a burden to them in delivering the support we're trying to do. The fund, of course, and the bank have an obligation, frankly, to our low-income country members to combine our efforts in a more effective and efficient way, working to create the future of hope, as Masoud stressed. And I think in that collaboration, of course, lots of thoughts about how the issue of debt resolution in particular can be accelerated and how we can work to better make sure that the debt relief that countries so desperately need to instill that future of hope is delivered more quickly. So to thank you again for your participation this morning. Very, very excellent discussion. I think we can sink our teeth into the many takeaways as we move forward. My thanks to the joint IMF and World Bank team for the hours that they put into making this possible. It's a great example, another great example of the collaboration between our two institutions. Thank you very much. Looking forward to seeing all of you at the spring meetings. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Antoinette, for those wonderful words and also for summing up what sounds like a really good set of discussions this morning. And let me also join Antoinette and really thank the IMF and World Bank teams who organized this. And I should also take this opportunity to thank you, Antoinette. It's really a pleasure to work together on many, many challenging issues, but I really feel we can always pick up the phone and get together and resolve issues, and I really, really appreciate that partnership. This event has really focused on the world's poorest and most vulnerable, and in many ways it speaks directly to what the World Bank's group mission is, which is to end poverty on a livable planet, as you also heard from Ajay this morning. And needless to say, we're having this discussion also at a time when the outlook is quite daunting. It was good to hear from Kristalina that it's not as bad as we had feared it would be, but we still need to work very, very hard to make it better. So I thought that was a very, very good message. But we are seeing these overlapping crises and intertwined crises that is causing a very, very difficult set of circumstances for the lowest income countries, particularly as they work to eradicate poverty, which has been very, very stubbornly starting to creep up again in some of the poorest countries. And just one data point that sticks with me very much is that a third of IDA countries, and I know you've discussed IDA a lot today, a third of IDA countries are actually poorer now than on the eve of the pandemic. I think this is very striking, and that we also know that the outlook for the very, very poorest, as we heard also in the fireside chat this morning, remains bleak. And that's why it's so important that we come together and really think what can work as accelerator steps that we can take to really help these countries transform actions and our meaningful partnerships into real action. We also heard today participants talk about how critical it is for countries to implement reforms to strengthen the economic stability, reduce the poverty, and accelerate the growth. And I think this is also very important because when you're in a crisis mode, it's easy to think we just need to make sure they get through this difficult time period. But it's very easy that we lay the foundations for growth as we're helping in a crisis. And I have to say, during this year, I've traveled around quite a bit to countries that are in very difficult economic circumstances, but are taking bold steps. One country I visited recently is Nigeria. Many of you know Nigeria has had two very pressing, difficult issues to address. One is to unify their exchange rates, which is having detrimental impact in their economy, very detrimental impact on the private sector, and the other one is very high fossil fuel subsidies. Two issues that we've been talking to them, IMF's been talking to them for many, many years about, and finally the steps have been taken to address these two issues. But it needs to come on the back of a strengthened social safety net and addressing other pressing issues such as food insecurity, which is also a very, very big concern. I think Kenya, it's another interesting case where Antoinette also referred to, avoided a liquidity cliff by basically embarking on fiscal reforms that were anchored in a medium-term revenue strategy, as well as with debt targets. And of course, there are many, many more good examples. But I think coming back to this issue that good policies really matter for development, and that what we need to do is make sure we don't just channel funds in the short term, but we also lay the grounds for growth. And this is where I think comprehensive policy packages that really attract the private sector matter, but also making sure that they drive strong and sustainable growth. We see that by our own estimates, implementing better policies could reduce the infrastructure investment needs to achieve the SDGs actually by half. And that's important when we're talking about so many resources needed. And this is where I also think that the knowledge work that we do together, the knowledge work IMF does, but also the knowledge work that the World Bank does, plays really critical roles. And you're very familiar with the country climate and development reports that we've been working on for the last few years, which work to identify the highest impact actions and policies that can really build resilience to climate change, but also our public finance reviews and our analytical work on growth and jobs. And you heard a lot from Ajay this morning on the fact that jobs is what's going to be the metric that we want to really be led by. But I have to say, I also feel that there are many reasons that we should be optimistic about the future of low-income countries. And that is because many IDA countries around the world is also where the investment opportunities and needs lie, but it's also where a green future will be built. And many countries have the potential to play this very critical role for the green transition. It's also home to the world's youngest population, we know that. And by 2050, I find this another number that is very compelling. 1 in 4 people on Earth will be African. And that will also be 1/3 of all the young people in the world. I think this is an incredible number that we should keep in mind. I wanted to talk a bit about the challenges and opportunities faced by IDA countries in the sense of, so what are we in the World Bank doing to accelerate and step up? Well, one is we need to really, and you've heard Ajay talk about this, and this is very much what I spend a lot of my time on as operations responsible, we need to speed up how fast we can deliver results for our clients. And we're doing that by simplifying a lot of processes that allow us to deliver these results much faster. So over the past 5 years, just to give you a sense, the World Bank has helped achieve good results. 100 million people find jobs, 500 million people get education, and 1 billion people access healthcare. But imagine how much more we could do if we cut down the time it took us to prepare and implement projects. So that keeps me very motivated to be able to take these numbers to even greater scale. But also because the challenges, the scale of the challenges is beyond the capacity of the public sector. So we've put huge emphasis now on recognizing the role the private sector can and really must play as a pivotal, as a partner to governments and to development finance institutions. So what we've been working on is putting together a much more meaningful One World Bank group, and this really means that we get the very best out of IBRD, IDA, IFC, and MIGA at any given time. And some of you will know that as of July 1, 20 of our country representatives will be what we call World Bank Group representatives, which means they will be accountable to the client to be able to represent the whole of our institution and all of the instruments, products, and solutions that we can bring to the table. And if this goes well, we plan to roll this out further. And then for all the reasons I mentioned earlier, we're really doubling down on IDA countries and on IDA 21. We really want and need the IDA 21 replenishment to be a success. The IDA is really important, and IDA really has been a lifeline for so many people around the world. And I think IDA financing, particularly for Africa, is increasing, which is very important because it's also in the context where we're seeing overall development finance flows to Africa actually go down. So IDA has been even more important there. It is also the largest single source of climate finance to low-income countries, particularly adaptation, which does not get a huge amount of finance to begin with, and certainly not climate finance. So the adaptation part is really important also to keep in mind. And the other issue that I like to always remind ourselves of, in a world with scarce resources, IDA is also very effective because it leverages. So if we can leverage close to 1 to 4, this is really compelling because it's good effectiveness and use of development resources. But we must make the case, and we must fight for the countries that need IDA. So let me just conclude by saying, as we head into the spring meetings, I think this type of discussion helps us focus, sets us on the right path that we need to be on to really step into these meetings and give the most important attention to the lowest income countries in the world that absolutely need us the most. So thank you so much, and great to see this work together. Thanks.
Thank you very much for the concluding words. This brings us to the end of today's event. On behalf of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank Group, we would like to thank our moderators, our panelists, and all attendees who have attended this event online or here in person. Unfortunately, we couldn't take questions from the audience. We had not enough time for that, but we will try to get back to those where we have the name in the next days. And for all the rest, we can and you can continue the conversation on the social media using the hashtag that you can see there, that's Action for Growth. And we will also share the recordings of this event on our social media. As you leave, we would also like to remind you to download the 2024 report on macroeconomic developments and prospects in low-income countries. This report was published yesterday. Take a look, and it's an interesting report, rich with a lot of information. You can get it on IMF website. We hope that those who are here with us in person can stay and join the networking lunch that we have in the room just behind this one. And to all the rest, thank you so much for joining, and have a great rest of the day.